What's up everybody, my name is Sawyer and if you've ever wondered how to make the perfect hyperlapse, today you're in luck because I'm going to show you 3 techniques to capture an incredible hyperlapse no matter what gear you have. So now you don't have an excuse. Let's just jump right into it. So quick location change, I'm actually back in Florence, Italy, but that won't matter. We're just gonna continue this video as if I'm in my studio back in California. Now, throughout my career, I've actually used hyperlapses quite a lot in a multitude of projects, but there's a couple things that always stand out when you're trying to create a hyperlapse. Movement, by definition, is really what defines a hyperlapse instead of just a normal old time lapse. Whether you're moving out from the side of a building, moving down a long road or bridge, or keeping something like a clock tower right in the middle of the photo. As you move around it, closer to it, further than it, it creates all this dynamic movement which really gives hyperlapses its distinct style. So the first method of hyperlapse is the traditional tripod hyperlapse. Now this method by far takes the most amount of time, it's the most frustrating, but it also gives you the most stable professional results. Now the reason it gives you these results is because the tripod is taking care of a few things for you. The tripod ensures the camera staying at the same height throughout the entire movement. The tripod is also making sure that the horizon isn't constantly changing while you're shooting your hyperlapse. Now there are a couple tips and tricks to using a tripod hyperlapse. First off, you want to be using a tripod that has metal legs. Now, this is primarily because if you're using a tripod with plastic legs, the legs can vary in length and they can bend different, creating your image to look like this as you're trying to capture your hyperlapse. You want to turn on the leveler in your camera. If it has it, this is the little thing that tells you if your camera is perfectly level. This ensures that the camera will be staying pretty stable and level and will give you the best results. Secondly, and this goes for all hyperlapses, you want to make sure your camera is shooting in manual mode so that the exposure isn't constantly changing. This is important because as you're taking individual photographs, it will still end up looking like a movie. When you're doing a hyperlapse, it's very, very important that whatever the subject of the hyperlapse is, stays in the exact same part of your camera throughout the entire movement. Now you can achieve this by turning on some kind of autofocus point or even turning on the grid within your camera to make sure that it is lined up with the subject throughout your movement. This will give you the smoothest movement and will also give you the coolest effect if you're trying to highlight something like a clock tower or a statue. It's very, very important that you take even steps at even time intervals throughout your hyperlapse. That can get very, very confusing and kind of frustrating, but this is because people that are moving around in the image need to be at a very constant flow. If you're taking a photo, a step, a photo, a step, and then you all of a sudden wait 10 seconds before you take the next step, everything in your scene is gonna jump rather than looking like fluid movement. So remember, even step distance, even time in between the steps. It can get frustrating, and in all honesty, it's the reason that I do not like the tripod method of hyperlapsing. However, for one specific purpose, the tripod method can be awesome. If you're using an ND filter or using a slower shutter speed, you can really get some cool motion blur going. This is literally impossible to capture with your handheld. It's impossible to capture with a gimbal. This style and technique is something that most people don't take the time to do. So if you do it and you do it properly, it can really help your project stand out from everything else on the internet. The second technique of hyperlapse is by far my favorite. It's also the easiest to do, and that is just handheld hyperlapsing. This is essentially holding the camera in your hands, taking a photo, taking a step, taking another photo, taking a step, taking a photo, taking a step. What's cool about this is you really don't need any gear other than the camera you already have with you. You don't need an intervalometer, you don't need a tripod, you're not gonna draw a lot of attention to yourself because it literally just looks like you're taking a photo. Now it's still really important to take even distance steps in between your photographs because this assures that your hyperlapse isn't gonna be speeding up or slowing down without a purpose throughout the movement. The goal of a hyperlapse is to make it look like a moving video. The goal of a good hyperlapse is to keep a very consistent speed throughout the camera movement. This makes it look like a video and makes people kind of wonder how you captured it. So for the most part, every single thing about tripod hyperlapsing is the exact same handheld, but there's a couple easier tips and tricks you can use. Now, the most important thing about the handheld hyperlapse, besides even steps, is using that leveler we spoke on before. Since you're not using a tripod now to assure the camera is staying perfectly horizontal, the leveler will become very, very important so that when you pick the camera up to your eye, you can make sure the camera isn't constantly moving. If there's too much movement in your photos like this back and forth, it'll look like this in your hyperlapse and really make the audience not feel like it was done professionally. Another huge tip and trick when using a handheld hyperlapse is using a camera strap. This way you can put the strap around your neck, hold the camera out in front of you like this, you can pick it up, take a step, pick it up, take a step. The leveler makes sure that the camera isn't moving horizontally, and that focus point that you'll have turned on within the camera makes sure that the subject is staying at the same place in the frame. Other than that, this becomes very, very easy because you can take photos a lot quicker. By far, I will not lie to you, the handheld hyperlapse is actually probably a lot easier than you even might be thinking it is right now. Now, if you're lucky enough to actually get your hands on a gimbal, a stabilizer, hyperlapses can become even easier than they were handheld. The gimbal approach to hyperlapsing is actually something that only has come around in the last few years, and it kind of blends the best of both worlds. You get the stability of a tripod so that you're not having to worry about the leveler at all. But you're also getting the mobility and freedom to be able to walk as if you're handheld and capture images on the go. Now, something interesting to note on the gimbal setup is there's two ways to capture a hyperlapse on a gimbal. First off, there is the traditional photo-based hyperlapse, which you will need an intervalometer. Because you don't want to be clicking the button on a camera while trying to hold a gimbal, you can plug an intervalometer into the camera and set the parameters. And by parameters, you can tell the intervalometer you want your camera to take one photo every second. And using this method is actually really cool because the camera is doing all of the timing for you, so your only job is to step in between photos. It gets very, very simple, and then you can just focus really on being creative and coming up with cool movements. Now, the other alternative way to create a hyperlapse on a gimbal might not be the traditional photo-based method, but it still achieves really the same result. Instead of taking photos, you just click video record on your camera and you just do the exact same movement you would have done. Instead of shooting photos, you're taking video, and you'll just put it in fast forward later in post and get a very similar result. Now, a lot of people would argue that's not really a hyperlapse, but at the end of the day, if you're just looking to achieve that type of look for a project, it will achieve those type of results. Now, a couple things to remember while shooting a video-based hyperlapse is you still need to be in manual controls. You still need to make sure autofocus is turned off. Any of these little imperfections, such as focus moving or exposure change, will only look exaggerated once they're sped up later in post-production. Also, you still want to turn on that autofocus point or the grid in your camera so that you can keep the subject in the same part of the frame. And other than that, the video-based hyperlapse is very straightforward. You can go out, you can try it today, and you can start to see the difference between all of the various looks. Now, remember, there is no right or wrong way to shoot a hyperlapse, there's only personal preference. So I really urge you to get out there and experiment with trying different types of hyperlapses to really start to figure out what type you're looking for your project. Don't listen to what people say. Don't read blogs that say you can't do a video-based hyperlapse, blah, blah, blah. If that's what you're looking for, that's exactly what you can do, and don't let anyone tell you different. Now, the last little section on our tutorial on hyperlapses today is going to be the math-based section of it, actually figuring out how many photographs you need to capture for however long you're looking for your hyperlapse to be. And this comes down to your project settings, but in most cinematic settings, it takes 24 photographs to make up 1 second of moving video. So if you'd like your hyperlapse to last 4 seconds, you're just gonna do 24 times 4, which I hope you realized was 96 photographs to make up this 4-second final clip. And the last thing I want to speak on, I see way too much on Instagram, and it's people just using hyperlapses because they look cool. You should realize that a hyperlapse is a tool just like slow motion, just like a drone. Hyperlapses should fit the narrative of the project that you're working on. Now, the place that I've really found hyperlapses shine in my projects are in the cinematic-based videos that are set to music. If you're doing something to a dubstep song, it might feel weird to just throw a hyperlapse over a very calm clip. However, if you save the hyperlapses until the big drop in the music where it goes crazy, That type of movement, that really distinct visual, can only add to the music and give the audience a really cool feeling. But a hyperlapse is only as good as the narrative you are trying to tell. So use hyperlapses where they fit. Don't just throw them in because they look cool. Figure out where they make the audience feel what you're going for, and then go crazy. So just get out there and come up with really cool creative ways to try to come up with new hyperlapses. And if you know of anyone who's just breaking the mold with new ways to do hyperlapses, please link them in the comments down below. I know myself, as well as many of the viewers watching this, would love to see them in action. So as always, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you probably took something away from it, and now being able to go and create a hyperlapse, no matter what budget you're at, no matter what gear you're at, you should have the tools to be able to put these into your projects today. And as always, please feel free to consider subscribing. I make brand new film and photography related videos every single Thursday and Sunday. And before I go, don't forget, stay motivated, stay inspired, and never stop creating. And I'll see you guys on Sunday. Peace.